Hello, my name is Brandon Fuhrer, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a topic that really interests me. Genetically modified crops are something that I've been studying for a long time now, and I just really want to take the opportunity to talk about them during this video. So, this year in January, I was given the opportunity to write for a pre-law blog in Atlanta. This one's located in Georgia, but it's a national blog, so I decided to write about, genetically modified crops and the laws that surround them. But today what I really want to do is talk about, start off with like the magnitude of genetically modified crops and start from there. So as you can see from this little graph right here, of the 1.5 billion acres of hectares of land that are, farmable, a solid percentage of that is genetically modified crops. So if you look at this GM crops this globally graph right here, you see that these are the four major crops that are genetically modified. But an interesting fact, this is globally, but in the United States, 90% of all these four crops are genetically modified. So chances are, if you're eating something with corn syrup or something like that, and it's genetically modified. So let's just talk a little bit about traditional farming now, and then we're going to go into GM farming. But as you can see from the picture, in between the rows of crop, there's weeds, and it's a nasty problem for farmers because they have to go in by hand, or using hand tools to remove it. But genetically modifying crops is different because you're able to actually genetically modify the makeup of the crop so that it's resistant to these herbicides that would normally kill it. So then what you do is you take these herbicides and you spray everything, including the crop, and it kills everything, and the only thing that's left is the genetically modified crop. So what ends up happening is you're left with these farms that are really beautiful. You have perfect rows of corn, and there's nothing to really, hamper the growing. But what ultimately happens is that, when you have genetically modified fields like this, you have a much higher crop yield. But of course, this leads to problems. So one of the problems with genetically modified crops is that weeds rise to super weeds. And what happens is over time these crops, these weeds grow resistant to the herbicide, and they're able to not be affected by the herbicide when it's sprayed. So becomes a major problem for farmers. And another problem with genetically modified crops is that it hurts the small farmers because when the big crop companies use these GM crops and have huge fields of genetically modified crops, they have much greater yields, and producers are just going to go straight to the massive factory farms, if you want to call them that, to get their crops from. And the small farmers can't really do much. So one of the major problems and one of the major causes of this whole controversy over GM crops is Monsanto. They're one of the biggest genetically modified bioengineering companies in the United States, and there's been a lot of outlash in terms of the lawsuits and things like that over the past few years. So Farmer Vermin Bowman is one example of somebody who's been affected by genetically modified crops. He was using the GM crops, and what ultimately happened was he was reusing the Monsanto seeds year over year, and that is not allowed by Monsanto. So what ultimately happened is that Monsanto sued him for reusing the seeds because he was violating the patent. And what ultimately happened is that the Supreme Court weighed in favor of Monsanto. They said that Monsanto's patent would provide scant benefit if they allowed Farmer Vermin Bowman to reuse the seeds year over year. So as you can see, the government is really weighing inside with the big GM company and not really the small time farmer. But so if we can't stop GM crops from being used, because there are some bad side effects that are currently being researched, we could at least label them. So according to a New York Times poll, 93% of Americans believe that GM crops should be identified. So they want to know if their food that they're eating contains genetically modified organisms. And even President Obama in 2007 said we will let folks know when their food has been genetically modified because Americans should know what they're buying. But of course, this has not yet happened. This was back in 2007 when Barack Obama was campaigning, and we're yet to see any legislation on this matter. So the FDA has stated that GM crops are not materially different, so it's true, the makeup of the crop is not different, and thus they are not subject to regulation. But this just adds on to the fact that I was saying that the big government, the United States government, is weighing inside with these large seed corporations, and Just to take that a step further, the FDA even said that they'll make it illegal to label something non-GMO because it is virtually impossible to say that your product does not contain genetically modified organisms because there could be trace amounts of it in it, so therefore they're making it illegal. So a recent case for labeling genetically modified organisms was the Washington Initiative 522 in the state of Washington, and ultimately what happened was that they were trying to get their all products that contain genetically modified organisms to be labeled. And the cases that they made included the fact that mixing animal, bacterial, and viral genes and combinations, aren't really known. There's not too much known about the health and environmental effects of doing such. So therefore, any food that contains a genetically modified organism should be labeled so that people know that there could be health side effects to what they're eating. So what ultimately happened was that the bill got shot down because $5 million of the funding for Vote No came from Monsanto. So this is unprecedented, and this is a huge number. And ultimately, the reason for this was that if this bill got passed in one state, it would just be a stepping stone in other states. So Monsanto did not want this to happen, and they really, they went to extremes to make sure it didn't. So what could be done? While nothing could be done, to stop GMOs from being grown, it's just a way of culture now in the United States. If that can't be done, the least that could be done is that they could be labeled, and that's what people should be pushing for right now.